It's
A
coming.
big breath, taking a
Hey,
big breath.
everybody. Welcome back to The Collective. We have another fantastic show for you planned out today. Very excited. We got Noel joining us. We got Brian joining us. We got Johnny joining us. This is a recurrence of magnitude in the fact that we have all these guys coming back. It's been a while since we've talked to all of them, and I am pumped. Now, while I am pumped, y'all should be doing the things, hitting the like button, hitting the subscribe button, hitting the notification, all those good things so you get your emails whenever we go live, which is, of course, Fridays for the Collective and Wednesdays for the Gold Mine. We are going to get into some quick intros and we'll get right into the topic of the day. Noel, you're on top. Give us a quick 10 to 15 seconds. Who are you? Where you come from? All that good stuff.
My name is Noel Brand. I live in the Netherlands. I'm a performance coach and the head coach of Breda Strength and Conditioning. I coach military hopefuls and a bunch of pro and competitive athletes.
Bam. I like it. Brian, how about yourself?
Retired homicide lieutenant, gang expert, teach my techniques for flipping gang members into informants, doing techniques for disrupting gang violence in cities, do consulting work, and I'm a co-host on Night Shift with Andrea Uplate, and I have another podcast called The Disruptors Podcast with BC and Ski.
Bam. And you just got married too, didn't you?
Yes. That's also why I'm always happy.
Congrats, brother.
Yeah, thank you.
Johnny, how about yourself?
Johnny Martin, National Director of Graduate Performance for University Health and Performance and Veterans Future Foundation. My primary work is in assisting combat veterans with transition back into civilian life. My background is in counseling, education, and mental performance, and I'm just psyched to be back on with you guys. Excited for a good session. Looking forward to chopping it up with everybody.
We are excited as well. Sean, how's life out in the mountains right now?
Things are good. Here with a great panel, the right crew to crack this one out of the park. Given that it's a massive subject, I'm sure that over the next 2 hours we'll do some good. So looking forward to learning some things myself.
Indeed. It's going to be good. We got a quick little shout out here. Glenn, what's good, fellas? Good to see you, buddy. Glad you can jump on the show. Now, I want to get your guys' quick thoughts right off the bat on decision making. When you first heard that this, or you first read that this was the topic, either last night or this morning or yesterday or whatever, you first saw it, what was the first thing that kind of clicked into your head in terms of, man, what am I going to talk about? What was that first thought? Sean, I'm going to hit you first. What do you think?
Sure. As I usually try to do, I try to come into the show with no thoughts and just see where the guests take us or where we take ourselves. But given that, you know, the panel as a whole, I'm sure has got this subject really well covered, I thought what I'd try to do is look at the topic from a completely different perspective as to how I would have normally jumped into this conversation, because we've all made tons of decisions through our lives. And some of those decisions have been big decisions, important decisions, like recently getting married. And so the decision-making process, I think we're all pretty professional at. So what I thought I would do is consider it through the biological process, of which a person can be good at making decisions, but their body might not be good at making good decisions. And so if their body isn't good at making good decisions, which I can talk about here in a sec, perhaps there's some ways that a person is using flawed logic to come to a good solution because of their incorrect biological wiring. And therefore, once they kind of sort out their biological aspect, the decision-making processes that were working for them in the past won't work for them in the future. And so let me just quickly lay that out. I made some quick notes. And so what I've stated is decision-making is a complex cognitive process involving multiple brain regions, neural pathways, and neurotransmitters. It begins really from two aspects, either the external perspective or the internal perspective. I'll start with the external perspective first. Externally, it occurs through either perception or sensory inputs. And so the decision-making process begins with sight, sound, smell, etc., by the nervous system, and then the thalamus acts as a relay director for the brain. However, internal cognition and thought can also act as a foundation for decision making. Those decisions can be triggered by recalling past experiences, memories, or learned information. Decision making can be driven by a completely internal world perspective. Now, so there's the external world, there's the internal world. That's decision making process 101. However, when you combine the two, we now have external information which can impact internal imagination / planning / abstract reasoning, and can be impacted by emotional states, biological needs like maybe you're thirsty, hungry, tired, etc., and your autonomous habits and your neural noise. And so what we've got is a world that's throwing stuff at us that we're making decisions on, but internally we're professionals at making decisions, but our biology might not be firing correctly to choose the right thing at the right time. And the simplest example I can think of right now is if your external world is coming at you, but you're super-de duper-de tired, well, now your internal making decisions are like perhaps compromised. And so if you're in a constant state of fatigue, if you're a shift worker and you're just wiped out for the last 12 years, well, you're seeing the external world and making decisions. And your internal world is also helping you make those decisions. The external decisions can be good, but the internal decisions are so compromised from your neural complexity being distorted or compromised that you're just making terrible autonomous internal decisions that you're not even aware of. And so understanding the difference between the external decisions and the compromised internal decisions is kind of where I was coming at things.
Bam. That is a fantastic starting point. Noel, thoughts on that?
Yeah, the first time I heard, "Hey, you're going to be on a podcast for decisions," I'm like, I'm a great example, how to make some bad decisions. But then again, what Sean was saying, I think I might recognize some things from the book Peak, or at least the book Peak mentioned those things. And the first things I thought about was that people that have an addiction, perhaps like alcohol, they're not supposed to make any decisions or not drink if they're hungry, angry, lonely, or tired. So the HALT, is an acronym that they use. I'm thinking about stuff like that. Don't make permanent decisions with temporary feelings. Those were. I was thinking also about it's not a mistake unless you learn from it. Thinking about bad decisions. So when you mentioned going to be on a podcast, which you mentioned to me when I got up this morning, while you were going to bed, I was like, okay, so decisions, thinking about stuff from philosophy, which I really like, thinking about impulse control. What do I want now versus what do I want later? I want this, but this is going to be a problem. Oh, that's a problem for future me. I'm glad I'm not him. Those kind of thoughts were going through my head when you mentioned being on a podcast for this subject.
Yeah, this is going to be a great show already, I can tell. Brian, what are your first thoughts on this?
If it's a personal decision I got to make, the first thing I think of is, did anybody I know go through that? And if they did, what was their decision and what were their outcomes? Right? Like legit. Now, when you talk about sleep deprivation or you start talking about hunger and fatigue, working homicides, that was one of the things that we had to battle, much like nursing staff, ER, surgeons. So we may be on an investigation for 24 to 48 hours straight, and you're working leads and constantly making decisions in which way you're going to operate. And one of the best approaches, at least that I experienced on my team and as well as what I teach, is just team oriented, so that if I start to make a really bad decision, I got several other people on the team that go, hey, we may not want to go down that path. Let's try this. Because everybody fatigues at different times, or their brains begin to get fixated on certain things that others see a big picture when maybe we're getting a little more microscopic. But in a legit serious realm, decision making for me, a lot of times I'm seeking input from other people, either team oriented or people that I know have already been through something like that before, and then ask them what their decision was, or if I already knew the decision they made, I'll ask them, hey, what was your basis for that? That's the main thing. Like I make decisions constantly, and I probably overthink and overanalyze a lot of those decisions. But it's always kind of helped me to get input from other people.
I'm loving where this is going. There's so many realms we could take this down. It's gonna be awesome. Johnny, what are your first thoughts on this?
Yeah, thank you. My first thoughts, as usual, when I come on the collective, quickly dissipate as soon as Sean starts to go, because then what I am reminded of today is like, man, I had these really solid thoughts that I wanted to share, and then Sean starts to go, and I go, man, of course he looked at it from that perspective, and he's got. Now I'm just mush brain. But the reason I was most excited about coming on when I saw that the topic was decision making, one of the things I speak on and teach on a lot is the importance that our values play in our decision making. So I would be really excited, at least in part, over the next couple hours to dig into the role that our values, our no matter what's, our lighthouses in the storm play in the decisions that we make all the time. And what I've really coached and tried to live, and this is very, very difficult, is really using my values as literally the defining answers to my toughest questions. Now, the minute to minute decisions that we make just based on cognitive and muscle memory, I didn't dig into that as much. And I'm excited to learn from everybody and to dig in. But I think a lot of people tend to get overwhelmed, and we hear the term all the time, and certainly the clients I have, around how overwhelmed they are or how anxious they are. And one of the questions that I ask them all the time is, well, walk me through how you make your day-to-day decisions. And where is this feeling of being overwhelmed coming from? The physical pieces we can point to. Brian talked about working stretches on a new homicide, 24, 36, 48 hours. We can't control the physical fatigue and the physical anxiety that's going to come from that stretch of work. Chance, when you and Sean were downrange, you don't know how long you're going to be off post and on target for, right? But for 99% of us, we don't live in that world. We live in a world there is a bit more organization, and most of the chaos that we create on our own. And so I really love this conversation, because where I'm always curious is, how can we make decisions based on our ethos, our vision, our values, and how might that decision-making process eliminate so much of the noise that we think just is an inherent part of our life every day that doesn't have to be. And so that's where I went first and foremost, is making decisions based on our no matter what's, our values.
Man, this is we got some deep thinkers on a great subject, and I'm stoked. And it's interesting because we all came at this from a slightly different perspective based on what we kind of saw as what's happening in the moment. And the where I came at it was how much training influences your decision making processes. So in terms of Sean and myself and Noel, we all come from a military background. That can shift your decision making a certain way. Same thing with Brian and yourself, Johnny. Like, when you come from a deep level of direct training, that will affect your decision making process for the rest of your life, especially if it's a young age. When you first join the military at 17, like Sean, or um, or people that at a very young age get into a dedicated sports track or something like that, that becomes everything is based off that decision. So the first place I'm going to go with it is that, in that realm, and then we're going to hit all of your topics because I have questions on all of them. I want to start with this one: is how has the amount of training that you've received influenced your thought processes and how you make decisions? That's where we're going to start with on this one. So, Brian, I'm going to come to you. What do you think?
say the first formal training I got in decision making was in the Army. I was in an infantry unit. So that was like the first experience of things being kind of organized and saying, as a soldier, you're just going to kind of do what you're told and master your skills. As you move up and you become a fire team leader or become a sergeant, now you've got to make decisions based on your soldiers, based on the equipment, based on their training, what they want out of the military, that sort of thing. So that was my first probably kind of entry into actually a process of decision making. Then after the Army, I went to college and actually got a degree in psychology. So I got really, really in depth with how the brain works, how human behavior is, how to motivate people, how to convince someone to do something maybe they don't want to do. And then so out of that, and then getting into police work, you really get into often people talk about the OODA loop and that sort of thing. And I don't have a presentation to give you on that. But to me, it was just kind of that my actions right now are going to affect myself and the citizens around me if I was, say, on patrol or that sort of thing. So my brain, as well as anybody else's, is just constantly calculating in an environment like that. So you kind of fall back on how your brain or how you've made decisions in the past and did they work out okay for you. And I was pretty fortunate that my brain is kind of wired to be a little more forward thinking. Even when I was younger, I was always trying to plan my future, where some people, their brains wired a little more impulsive and they're a little more in the moment, and they make, actions now and decisions now based on how they either feel or immediate gratification. I think we kind of mentioned that earlier. And so that's one of those things that in a realm of the military or hospital work or police work, firefighter, whatever, if people are wired that way and they make impulsive decisions, other people can suffer or people can lose their life, based on that. So,
yeah, that's a great first point. Noel, thoughts on this?
Yeah, so I joined the military at 24. I was slightly older already. Went to school, studied, and had a job. And then I joined the Royal Netherlands Marine Corps. Very impulsive back then. Less so nowadays, but when I went through combat lifesaver school and then course, and then did the medic course. That definitely changed a lot for me because you have more responsibility, even as a Marine first class. And then, being responsible as a medic on deployment, you had to think about more than just you and your sector, but you had to think, and the person in front of you or behind you, but you had to, be more mindful of your decisions, your thoughts, anticipating things that might happen. And like you just, like what was just mentioned, is that your decisions or not making a decision, what might also just be considered making a decision, not doing anything, it's not just you getting in harm's way, but also your teammates or the Marine in front of you or behind you. So that influenced my decision making, my thought process a lot. But unfortunately, or I would say that people that leave the military, which we talked about before, we went live, and transitioning out of that, you also now have to unlearn certain things and thought processes that now do not serve you anymore, like the fast acting fast or doing stuff because someone's life is on the line. Now, this might be a little bit difficult for some people still in the military to hear, but people in the military or that have been in the military are like, they're shooting at us. Yeah, okay, whatever. Hey, we're going to be late. We're going to be late. Your values or what you think is important gets kind of skewed because, you're not in the military anymore and there's no actual life and death situation that you need to handle. So you need to, somebody mentioned this, it's not like a switch that you flip, but it's more like dials that you need to adjust, from a 10 to an 8, or from an 8 to a 2, and then there are different dials that you need to manage instead of just black and white, on or off. I guess that has really changed and influenced my thought process.
I love that. That's a fantastic point. Johnny, thoughts on this?
Yeah, I love what has been shared already. I would love to double down on what Noel just shared, though, because I've never heard it framed that way. Sort of, I love how he just framed it around knowing when we need to be at an 8, and the level of intent and commitment we need to make towards a decision, and when we need to be down at an 2. And that's environmentally specific, I would imagine. For me, my first introduction is probably a lot like many of ours, where we were just content to have many of the big decisions made for us, and they were either made for us by, in y'all's case in the military, they were often made for you by senior NCOs or senior level leaders, and you just did what you were supposed to do. But even as a young adolescent, being coached and then going on to school and competing in other sports, I often felt like many of the decisions that I would want to make, those were taken out of my hands. And I think the struggle that a lot of adults have in the work that I do is being the captain of their own lives, right? Empowering themselves to not count on others to make the call, if you will, or make decisions for them, but to have the courage, to have the bravery, to be willing to dig in and do the work, to practice the power of the pause and say, let me evaluate this, not based on the lens that someone else is sharing with me in its entirety, because I'm viewing this situation from my lens, and the outcome of this decision is going to affect me. I think people by and large have kind of a laissez-faire attitude to the day-to-day decisions. They rinse and repeat and they go about life, and then they'll get on and talk with me or others and complain about why they're not growing or getting better. Well, it is in those reps, those small reps, when we get a chance to make a different choice, that the actual change occurs within our life, right? We get better at what we practice. And when I look at how I made decisions as an adolescent, a young man, even a young professional, against how I make decisions today, I'm far more calculated in the decisions that I make today, far more, because their impact is not just on me. It is on, in familial decisions, that impact is on my wife and my children, potentially. In professional decisions, that impact is on our veterans and our active duty service members. And so a lot of times, in my role at least, removing myself from the situation, removing the emotion from the situation, and dealing with the facts and saying, hey, this is a human being I'm talking to that is seeing this situation from a very different lens than I'm seeing it from. And so my job is not to get them to make a decision based on the lens that I view it from. My role is to be a guide on the side and help them so that we can make a joint decision. That joint decision-making model has been very popular in medicine for a long time, now creeping its way into mental performance and other professions. But really importantly in my work is to see the situation from their perspective, not from mine. And so that's really shifted the way I make decisions with new clients and new veterans as well. I can't walk in the room thinking I've seen this movie before, because even though I have, the movie for them is very different. And even sometimes, you guys know this from being on the battlefield or doing the work you did, Brian, in law enforcement, where I see this the most, believe it or not, guys, is in grief work, when I work with men and women that are trying to process the emotions around a loss, right? So just to share a quick example, my father was my hero and my idol, right? I have one brother. I was with my dad in the morning. 4 hours later, my dad was dead. The way that I have processed that loss and the decisions I've made as a result of my father's death are vastly different than my brother's. same father, same upbringing, same life experience, all the things, but I'm not viewing the loss from the same lens that my brother is. And I think we have to be really mindful of that when we're coaching other people and supporting other people, is that our lens really doesn't matter. Our job is to get a better understanding of what their lens is so that we can make those decisions as a team and not as individuals. I don't believe in my work. I'm not the expert on anybody. People are the experts on themselves. And my job is to figure out what they're thinking, what history has taught them about these decisions, what they think is going to come on the back end of these choices, and try to be a guide on the side so that we can both move together in a direction that is positive. So I know I went a few different places there, Chance. I apologize, but that's just kind of where my heart and head took me, brother.
I love it. I love it. This is fantastic, and I really love where this is going. And we've all seemed to be able to peel off another layer of this conversation. We're only 20 minutes in. We're gonna get into some nuance here. I love it. Sean, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, building off of what the fellas said, I think I'd like to take the term training, and I know that it's correctly sentenced out there, but I'd like everyone to think about, who's listening, the word training, and not consider it as an isolated tiny phase of your life, like basic training or your military training or whatever the case is. Any time you're involved in anything, you're training. You're training your brain. You're training your body. You're training your response to life. You're training yourself for life. And so when I think of training in this sentence, what I think of is kind of what BC said, is we're a reflection of the life that we've lived, but we're a reflection of the people around us. And so if BC has got, a decision to make and he wants to run it by the people that are around him that he trusts, or likes to get a cold eye review from someone who's more than arm's distance so he can kind of work on that as part of the decision-making puzzle. Well, what we're talking about here is my mind and now working in conjunction with the group mind. And so we aren't just a single organism unless we're a hermit in a cave and we don't talk to people. What we are is a group mind. Just like we are right now, we're a group mind. We're working on a topic collectively, in conjunction with each other, playing off of each other's ideas. Whether we agree or disagree is neither here nor there. What we are doing is we're combining our minds on a singular subject. And so that is group mind to me. So when you do training, you're not just training yourself, you're training within the group mind, and you're training the group mind. And so if you're looking on a way to improve your life today, and you're future casting, thinking about the future, if you've got the opportunity to make the decision to get involved in more group mind rather than less group mind, go for the more group mind. But don't just casually choose any group mind. Choose one that is going to cause you to pause and think deeper, just like this panel does for me. As I'm listening to the guests, I'm thinking about things in a different way than what I was thinking about 15 minutes ago. And so you need to get involved with people who will challenge your thought process. And by challenge, I don't mean it has to be confrontational. I mean, it should be building your mind as well as breaking down your mind so that you can consider thought processes in a novel way. Now, I've talked about the single mind. I've talked about the group mind within training. Training isn't a one-time affair, as I stated. It is an evolutionary process throughout the entirety of your life. So I will give an example. Within the military, I was taught to have a pretty good thought process. That thought process was refined mostly through adversity and rapid fire demands for rapid fire calculated decisions. And so the Army taught me one way of thinking. But then when I got out, I had a moment when I was a computer system engineer. And there's a phrase in computer system engineering at the time, it was this, and now in brackets, if this, then that. If this, then that. So whatever comes at you within the computer networking system, we'll call it, if this, then that. And it was always a branching decision point, left, right, up, down, in, out, black, white. Branching. If this, branching decision, then that. If this, then that. And so we all have branching decisions every single freaking millisecond in front of our noses. It's always branching. It's not so convoluted that we've got a gajillion decisions to make right now. We've got 2 decisions to make. Do it right, do it wrong. Try harder, try less. Simplifying the decisions that we have to make within our thought processes is not just a result of that one time we were in basic training. It's a result of that time we went through basic training, then became a computer system engineer, and it got simplified for us. If this, then that. The next phase of my life, the next phase of my life, the next phase of my life, every time I've gone through a phase of life, I've refined my thought process to make it even simpler, right down to this moment where I truly believe life is a pretty simple algorithm. You frickin' do your best to make the right decision on that left-right branching decision that is always in front of our nose.
This is it's getting into some pretty fantastic areas, and I wrote down here a little while ago, accepting our role in leadership, and I think it was I can't remember who said it, but it was the idea of the fact that we in the military, sometimes when you first start, you're going to be taking orders, right? Somebody tells you what to do, you're like, yep, okay, cool. A lot of decisions that you need to make are made for you. But as you get further along, you have to start taking those leadership roles and accepting those positions where you then have to make those decisions for other people. And I think it's an interesting concept to be able to really develop around the where that changeover happens, because there's a little gray area there where you're not really making decisions, but you are making kind of decisions. And by not making some decisions, you're making other decisions. And it kind of flows back and forth. I think it's a really great line of questioning to go down. But I want to get any other thoughts on this before we jump into anything else. I'm going to come back to Noel. What do you think on what Sean just said?
I really like what Sean said. I think, there's a book, Atomic Habits, which says, every choice you make is a vote for the person you want to become. I recently, last week, presented at the NSCA Annual Tactical Conference, and I spoke about a group ethic that if you, I screen my clients, and they have to be coachable, committed, and consistent. I also then introduce other people that have similar goals. And what I now have is one person that is coachable, committed, and consistent, someone else who is also like that. And then they start feeding off each other. So it's not just 1 + 1, but it's 1 + 1 = 3, because this one's working hard, then the other person starts working hard. You kind of set an example of what you expect from yourself and from others. So, and Jim Rohn said this, you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. So if you have 5 people that are absolute studs and you introduce a 6th person to that group, that's going to be the 6th stud, hopefully making the right decisions, And because I spoke last week about, habits and stuff like that, it's habits to choose, am I going to have, simple example, am I stuffing this in my face nutrition wise, or am I eating this? Am I gonna stay up late and be on a podcast, or am I gonna go to bed early because I have an early day? It's like these simple decisions, depending on what age you are or what your goals are, and that's where values obviously come in. What do I want now and what do I want later? But when Sean mentioned that, I was like, the group think, if you want to emulate a certain behavior, go to a group where the desired behavior is the norm. That was also what kind of came to mind when Sean said that.
I love that. BC, any thoughts?
Yeah, The decision making with leadership levels right now in the U.S. and probably a bunch of other countries, there's kind of a deficit in the police world with leadership making decisions more based on their career than the betterment for their team or their district or division or whatever they're in charge of, or I should say, whatever they're responsible for. Not all departments, but a large majority of large city departments. That's kind of the thing I hear a lot of, is that there's this belief that once you move up past, patrol officer, detective, you move into sergeant, lieutenant, and on up, that the higher you go, the more people you have to harm to get the rank. That wasn't my experience. And within my department, we had really good leadership. And then we had also some of the self-servers like that. One of the things that I did see is that people who would make those decisions in leadership based on putting their subordinates or the people they're responsible for first gained the most support, obviously, from their subordinates, but also from the department. So people who didn't even work directly under that person would still support them heavily as responsibilities began to cross over. Now, I don't know, like the question people always ask me in my training classes and stuff, they'll ask like, well, your experience was that in your department. Why do you think this is occurring though across the board? I think a lot of that is when any kind of department or agency or company removes the responsibility from a leader to actually be accountable for their decisions, you begin to see that leader or that person that's in that position making those decisions to further their career, but also not being held accountable or being told, hey, you're the leader, you made this decision, and it was actually the wrong decision, and it was for all the wrong reasons. Sometimes you can prove that in an agency if you know the talent or you know the people best that you work with, or you ask those questions. That's kind of a long, convoluted answer I'm trying to give, but sadly, I hear it time and time again where 15, 20 years ago, when I was starting out my career and still on the patrol officer detective level, I didn't hear that as much. I was actually hearing a lot more about the crime fighter mindset and the leadership that were making decisions to basically disrupt violent crime or to get their people trained up so that they could replace them as they retired. So this vast knowledge would continue on and not dissipate.
That's a fantastic point. Johnny, you got any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think the biggest takeaway for me, the biggest reinforcement from what Sean shared, really on two fronts. One, I love how he took the decision-making idea and really simplified it. If you look at neurological behavior change, so how a human being really gets to a change in behavior, Sean defined it beautifully. It's really about doing the little things correctly and over time. I mean, that is behavior change. We can dress the definition up any way we want, but from a neurological perspective, that is how a human being changes behavior. That's how they go in, rewire that data. They do it by doing something very simply, correctly, and they do it day after day after day. Earlier on in the call, Noel talked about, when you first asked us, Chance, what were we thinking about relative to decision making? And Noel mentioned, the disease of addiction. All of us on this call and probably everybody listening has been touched by that disease in one way or another, either directly through family, through our work, or all of the above. Well, if you talk to somebody who is actively practicing sobriety, what will they tell you? They will tell you, just do the next right thing. Just do the next right thing. I'm only going to pay attention to what's right in front of me. And what Sean reiterated, which I love, is this idea of decision making. I think all of us complicate the things that are so far ahead of us that we miss what is staring us right in the face. And that is, well, what does the next 1 hour win look like? What does stepping into a solid decision over the next 60 minutes look like? And let me not get 6 hours down the road or 6 days down the road. Let me tackle what's right in front of me, and let me do it really well, and let me do it with great intent. And then let's rinse and repeat that thing, so that it becomes a change in behavior. Um, the other thing I'll just speak on quickly that I love that he shared is this essence of how our community can be strengthened by the decisions that we make, and how we can be strengthened by the day-to-day decisions that our community makes. And I don't think that can be understated, the importance of belonging and being part of something that helps us and challenges us. Sean used the word challenge, and not in the way that is confrontational, although we all, I think, would agree that sometimes that's really good too. We need that. But this idea that I am watching others that I respect, that I want to be in the room with, I'm watching them operate at a certain level. Is that going to allow me to take a pause before I make that next decision and say, man, I want to continue to earn my place in this room. And the only way that I'm going to be able to do that is to be able to be much more intentional about the decisions that I make, because I want to earn a place in this room. I want to earn a place on this call. And so I loved his take on, man, our community, if we pick the right one or choose to get in the right one, can have such a powerful, powerful impact on the decisions that we make as individuals. And then those decisions, as Sean said, can also positively affect the group. So as usual, he's given us gold to work with today. So I appreciate that, Sean, always. But yeah, this is that's what I got on that front, Chance.
So far, I think everyone's been putting gold down so far. This has been, I'm going to have a really hard time cutting any of these things into small clips because these are fantastic points across the board. Sean, any thoughts on any of that?
I do. So now I'm going to try to flippity flop things. So hang on. I did make a couple of other little.
I knew it was coming, boys.
Dude, it's coming.
Yeah,
It's
It
coming.
was coming.
We're all agreeing, and now we're going to disagree with our agreeance. So, so there's a couple of biological mechanisms that I've just got to quickly kick out. It'll take me less than 30 seconds. So our sensory input from the external world runs through our thalamus, and then from the thalamus is kind of like the sorting center. It decides, I'm going to redirect the ideas this way. I'm going to redirect the ideas that way. It goes to the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is higher order functioning or higher order thinking. It works on reasoning, planning, and evaluating. The PFC or prefrontal cortex then kicks out its kind of solutions to the amygdala. The amygdala then does this. This is where it starts to get important. It then starts to do emotional processing, emotional weighting, not you're going to wait, but weighting of the different decisions that are in front of you. Now, I'm going to pause there and I'm going to reiterate the statement, if this, then that. So if you want to overcomplicate your amygdala decision-making process, in effect, if you want to slow down your processing, what you're going to do is you're going to hang out there and stew on a billion ideas while you ruminate. Or you can simplify your life and simply, if this, then that, left, right, up, down, in, out. You simplify down to 2 decisions, this way or that way, and then you don't have this pause at the amygdala. It goes from there to the basal ganglia, where you have habit formation, reward-based decisions, where it also evaluates the rewards and punishment. So that's kind of playing off what BC is referring to is consequences. Back in the day, there was consequences if you're kind of being a screwball. But nowadays, if you're being a screwball and there's no one like, sorting out the system, sorting out the organization, then being a screwball becomes the norm. And then the rewards, punishments, if they're taken out of the process, things go awry. And then that turns into groupthink, and then that turns into all kinds of bigger problems. But I'm going to go from the basal ganglia now to the final point, my point, which is the hippocampus. The hippocampus is responsible for memory formation, memory retrieval, and it integrates past experiences. So we'll go back to everyone's in the army, basic training. What you experience in basic training could be good or bad. But whatever it is, you're going to carry that with you for the rest of your life in your hippocampus. The lessons that you've learned, you're going to rely on them. The things that were super suck, they're always going to be there until you start processing these things. Finally, to my point, no matter what you experience in training, no matter what you experience from the people that are surrounding you, no matter what's going on in your life, you can try to make the best decisions right now in this very moment on the branching decision of go left, go right. You can do your freaking best. But if just in front of that moment, you've got all of this nonsense hanging out in your biological mechanism background of the hippocampus that you haven't processed, like you never had a dog when you were a kid, you've always been bummed about that, and every time you see a dog, your world goes upside down. So the hippocampus, these things that you have to quote unquote resolve, and by resolve, I mean you don't have to go to a cave and hang out there for years. Sometimes it's just running a convo past a bro hemo that kind of bam, okay, I can keep on flowing. What I'm looking for in life is to flow through life, maybe not seamlessly, but successfully. And the only way I know how to do that is to ditch the garbage from the past, exist in the present, look at the problem directly in front of my nose, if this, then that, and then try to hang out with cool people. I mean, it's a super simple equation, but somehow we overcomplicate it. And I think a lot of the overcomplication begins at the hippocampus level, where we have unresolved past experiences, memories, feelings, emotions, and we just let them hang out there and kind of screw up our life. That's my thoughts.
This is a fantastic point. One of the issues that I know I struggled with for a lot when I first got out of the military was I thought I knew what I was doing. And I did not take into account the fact that I really had only ever had the one major experience in terms of putting my effort into one aspect of my life. Everything else had been very kind of open across the board. But I'm wondering, we've talked a lot about like groupthink, or getting input from the people around you and actually engaging that, and it's all well and good to get information from other people, but to incorporate it, especially to your point, Sean, of looking at your past experiences and just letting them float in the back of your head or at the hippocampus level without actually dealing with them, without actually going into and going, what did I learn from this, and then how do you incorporate it into how you make decisions later on, especially high stakes decisions, things that like really, really matter. Like, oh, am I going to get 1% milk or 2% milk? That's not a major branching decision that you need to make. But do I join the military or do I go to college? That's a big decision, right? And how those things get made, it really depends on how you inputted certain things throughout your life. Sean, what do you got?
Sorry to jump in, boys, but I'm just, it's not that I disagree hard, Chance. I love how you kind of put that across with the 1% milk, 2% milk. But just like Miyamoto Musashi says, how you do one thing is how you do everything. And so if you want to draw your sword the wrong way once, you're drawing your sword the wrong way 1,000 times. And so when it comes to the milk, it's a conscious decision. And you can either offload that into thoughtless decision or be in the moment and decide why you're deciding 1%. Decide why you're deciding 2%. Don't just grab the 2 and think, okay, a random moment. I like to think about every single freaking moment to include, why am I even here right now? And so there is no decision in my life that is so small that it doesn't gain my attention, that it doesn't cause me to be in the decision. There's a time when I was younger, for sure, that Whatever, man, freaking bring it. Let's go. I'm not going to think about it. I'm just going to smash. But nowadays, I try to exist in every single moment. Every single decision is as important as the big decisions, in my opinion.
This is, I kind of felt as soon as I said it, I could feel the eyes coming through the screen at me. But so here's the question then, is how do you incorporate input from your surroundings into your decision-making processes? Johnny, I'm going to start with you. What do you think?
Yeah, it's a tough place to start because what I do is I'm trying to. One of the things I don't think we do enough of as people is I'm trying to digest all of the great stuff that is coming from the group and really pause to reflect on it. Let me try to answer your question as best I can right now based on all of the information that I'm hearing from everybody that I'm reflecting on. I think for me, what you're really speaking to is the concept of present moment awareness. I know Sean is like hammering in on that in his own life right now, and the importance of being where his feet are, and the gravity or lack thereof of the milk choice may or may not carry the same weight as the gravity of whether or not it's time to squeeze the trigger or take that jump off the bridge because you trust that the water's deep enough, right? And it's just going to be a fun jump. What I've seen time and time again, especially in group settings, when it comes to decision making, is that if you are not confident, if you're not internally confident, then your decisions will oftentimes be affected by the strength of the group. And the one caution that I would throw out into this conversation is if everybody in a small group thinks that decision A is the best decision, and you have questions internal about that decision, then I think the way that we empower ourselves as human beings is to be brave enough to ask those clarifying questions. I am not always of the belief that as one goes, we all go. Yes, there are environments where that is absolutely true. It absolutely must be. We don't have time to pause and to reflect on every decision. Sometimes we just got to go, right? And I'm well aware of that. I do think, to answer your questions, though, where we have to be careful is we will not strengthen our own internal decision-making ability if we just by default don't speak on the things that are of either concern or importance to us and just go along to get along. We're not strengthening our ability in that community setting to make decisions, and we're not strengthening the group. So I think when it comes to joint or group decision making, while there's tons of power in the minds in the room, what we can't ignore is that for as many minds as there are in that room, there are as many egos as well. And all of those egos are shaped by those people's individual experiences. And there's no way for us to quantify why they are articulating why they want to make the decision that they think the group should make. But we can't dismiss the power that ego plays in the room. And so my only caution is, and I know I have the coach hat on now, but I share this with people all the time. Don't let anybody ever stifle your voice. Be heard. If you have something that you're concerned about or that is important to you within the group and it affects the decision that the group will make, don't sit on that. Don't sit on that. Where people are apprehensive is that nobody wants to be judged. Nobody wants to be criticized. Nobody wants to be analyzed. Nobody wants to be blamed. And so what we often do is we just keep our mouth shut and we go along to get along. I am not a believer in that at all. I think having the tough conversation, voicing your opinion in a way that is respectful but honest, it goes such a long way, not just in the growth of the group, but in our own growth as individuals.
Yeah, and if you don't ask those questions, it can breed resentment pretty fast too. If you just kind of go along, you'll eventually get to a resentment position. Noel, thoughts on this?
I think it was a great point. I think pleasing others, to go along with a group, that's definitely something I think everybody at least once has experienced. I forgot which book I read this in. I read a bunch of books the last couple of weeks. Perhaps it was Master of Change by Brad Stulberg, but he talks about groupthink. You're opposed to something, but you're not speaking up. So you're just like, yeah, I'm just gonna be quiet and let it whatever, instead of raising your voice. So what I thought of, so thank you for that. So what I want to say about how do you incorporate input and expertise of others. Something else that I read was, advice is good, but not all advice is equal. Because some people know the poem "The Man in the Arena." So people, there's a great quote. I'm going to probably slaughter it, but it's he who jumps in the void is not you're not supposed to tell others why you're doing that. If the one standing on the side watching you jump or be like, oh, that's a bad idea. You don't owe an explanation to those people. So what I was getting at was, if somebody who has done the thing that I'm, trying to attempt, he gives me advice, that's advice that's perhaps slightly, has more weight than somebody who's never gotten off the couch and never done anything. So, advice is good, but not all advice is equal. I would say that for me personally would be something that I, in a respectful way, should be mindful of. This person has done this before. They want to help me avoid a couple of pitfalls. That's perhaps a smart idea. Then also running that advice by somebody who knows you, understands you, and will respectfully tell you when it's a bad idea. Perhaps that might be a great idea. And I was kind of forgetting where I was going with this, but it comes down to that. Oh, I remember again. I think it's also very important that you know your own values. What kind of person am I? Why am I doing this? For me, for instance, and I think I mentioned this before, meditation and journaling helped a lot to set my own moral and mental compass. That's why I think I love philosophy as well. It helped me define my own core values, so it became easier for me to perhaps find my own way, and thereby finding out what is worth my time and my effort. What do I want to work on? What am I working on? And now I'm going to search out people that have done these things, and I will listen to their advice instead of listening to everybody pitch in their 2 cents, what they think is a great idea.
Mm-hmm. I'm picturing like a bouncer standing at a door, like, oh, you're not on the list, and sending them off into another realm. I think that's a fantastic point. Brian, thoughts on this?
As ego free as you possibly can when you're making your own decision, but also, like you were saying earlier, just being aware of other people's egos in the room. And I kind of teach a lot about that. Like, just know that other people, especially the more important decision that you have to make or part of your team, the more other people in an organization may want clout, or they may want to be able to say they were part of that decision. And this is pretty brutal, but if that person who is starting to give you input doesn't have a background anywhere close to the decision you're trying to make, then just exclude them. Because in business and in government, there's this term benchmarking that people throw out. And because I moved up through the ranks, I sat in different meetings with command staff, and people would throw out this term of benchmarking. And the idea was to contact other agencies and ask them, well, hey, we got a lot of car break-ins. We're seeing a spike, on our graph. What do we do about that? Let's call these other agencies. Well, the other agencies would would give an idea of what they did to try to curb the car break-ins. And because weak leaders want to have some kind of idea, then they say, hey, well, we learned that there's this technique that, whatever police department used. Well, they never really do the follow-up that says, yeah, your project actually decreased the break-ins. It's more of this idea of, I'm coming to the meeting with this benchmarking, and I've done what you've asked me to do, and now I'm going to throw it out there. And I'll give this example. I heard a leader one time in a meeting talking about car break-ins and saying, well, the problem we have in these parking lots and throughout the city is that the cars are getting broken into, and there's valuable things left in these cars. And so what we can do is the city can buy these lock boxes, and we can put them in these large parking lots, and then citizens can just lock up all their valuables in these lock boxes, and then we won't have as many car break-ins. And I kind of felt like, because I was the lowest ranking person at the time, I was a sergeant in a room of lieutenants all the way up to the chief. And I felt like I was in an episode of The Twilight Zone, or I was being punked or something, because I had no earthly idea why this person thought this is a good solution. And I'm kind of going off on a tangent, but I'm using a real world example of sitting in a room that a very large city is trying to make a decision based on car break-ins and not knowing human behavior and not knowing how the driver and the citizen make their own decisions to leave very valuable things in a car in a public parking lot, and then the car gets broken into. So we were also analyzing, why are the cars getting broken into? Well, we don't know. Okay, well, how? Oh, because people are leaving their cars unlocked. Why are citizens leaving their cars unlocked? And then you start to find out that citizens are saying, well, I don't want my window to get broken, so I just leave the car doors unlocked. It's like, well, how about you take this stuff and put it in your trunk, or just take it with you? But when you leave it out in plain eyesight, criminals come by, they check the cars, and they look for the items they want to steal, and then they check the door handle. How do I know that? Because I've talked to numerous people who break into cars for a living, and they tell me that's why they do what they do. So this grand idea and these benchmarking ideas, it's like, until you get to the root of the problem, don't even try to make decisions. I don't know. That was a long story, but that was like insight into blowing my mind. And I had a really great leader at the time who said, hey, you got to be in these meetings, because I was on an intel unit, but he was like, I need you to see behind the curtain too. I need you to understand how some people, not all command staff, but how some people are incapable of making really good decisions because they have no crime fighting skills, or they've never really sat in a room with a gang member or sat in a room with someone who's killed somebody, or that, but they're making these very important decisions based on the good idea fairy. I don't know.
Yeah. Chance, do you mind? I love everything that Brian just shared, but in light of our discussion on decision making, for me, what just jumped out, and I agree with everything he shared, but it actually started to piss me off a little bit, because what it really made me think about relative to decision making is not everybody should have a seat at the table.
Right.
And so many of us literally should be working every day to keep our side of the street clean, and worry so much less about what our neighbor's sidewalk looks like. When we look at decision making on any team, and all of us on this call are, what many would consider to be leaders in our space. I talk to people on our team all the time, and they get angry that they weren't invited to a meeting, or they weren't asked for their opinion during a roundtable, or, sometimes we have meetings where some people get an opinion, some people get a vote, some people get nothing at all, just sit in here and learn, right? But we have to work on strengthening our areas of talents, strengths, gifts, expertise, all of the things that put us in a position where, if I sit in a room with Brian and 6 other cops, man, I'm just going to keep my mouth shut and listen because I've never done the job. Like, I don't have anything to add except for wasting time. And so when we talk about decision making, I think it's so critically important that we talk about it from an individual level. And I had, to share an example, I was struggling in my personal life and career about a year and a half ago. And I was 1000% in the pity party. And I was the expert on everything that had nothing to do with my role in my job. I was just in that place. So everybody I talked to, I was complaining. I had all the solutions. I had all the answers. I had it all figured out. And I spoke, I believe, hugely in what I call a personal board of advisors. So I have men in my life that know a lot more than I do about certain areas, right? Trusted older gentleman that I go to and I talk to him about my marriage because I respect so much how he has raised his children and treats his wife. Another guy I talk to about finances. Another guy I talk to about my mental health. Just men that I trust that I know more than I do. So I called one of these guys and I'm, just complaining. And he asked me one question. He said, are you doing the very, very best you can in the role that you are being paid to do? And I paused for a second and I said, what do you mean, man? I do a good job at my job. He said, it's not what I asked. Are you maximizing your talents, your strengths, and your gifts in the role that you are being paid to do? And I said, well, I'm sure there's areas where I could get better. He goes, why don't you spend your time focusing on those areas? And it was a conversation that I needed so badly because I started making decisions that were in my lane of responsibility and, moreover, my lane of control. As human beings, we want to be invited to every single party. And when we're not invited to the party, we complain, we bitch and moan, we talk about everybody else, but we are not paying attention to the party that we are hosting. And Brian just flagged that up for me. And I just think it's a great reminder for people like, man, before you start throwing stones and thinking you have all the answers to everybody else's issues and making decisions that are way higher level than I should have been making, but I thought I could make them. I was wrong. Man, I had to do a much better job right in my own lane. And quite frankly, I had to do a much better job right in my own home. And so I just wanted to put that out there only because I think vulnerability is important. And Brian just brought that top of mind for me, man. So thank you, Brian.
That's wicked. The funny part is that we had kind of a similar issue, Brian, to what you were saying in Toronto. People's houses getting broken into so people could steal their cars. And the solution that the Toronto police came up with was leave your doors unlocked so that people can come take your keys. Or leave your keys by the front door. So when they do break in the door, you can just take the keys. And it's like, it's so short-sighted and it's not addressing the problem. And it is, as you said, Johnny, it is looking at other people, looking at the issue obtusely rather than just boiling it down to what is the issue. Oh, cars are getting stolen or cars getting broken into or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Like, dive a little bit, just a little bit into the problem. Sean, you got thoughts on any of this?
I do. And so 2 thoughts, actually. One, funnily enough, on vehicles being broken into. Right here in our little hobbit town, we have a bit of a bear issue. And so cars aren't always broken in by criminals. They're sometimes broken into by bears. And you know that because you can see their goofy little claw hook marks on your door handle. And then when you take a look inside your car, you can see their big ass marks on your front driver's seat. A bear ass mark is a dead giveaway that a bear broke into your car. So what do you do about that? What do you do? Well, what you don't do is put a frickin' jar of honey on your dashboard. So there is some common sense involved in all of these problems, and I think that's probably for another podcast. I'll say this, and this is back to what Noel was saying, jumping into the void. And as he was relaying that, I was visualizing a moment, not a real moment, but a construct, a mental construct, if you will. And so what I saw was someone standing next to the edge of a hole. We'll call it the void. And then there's another person standing next to them who jumps into the void. So one will stand there forever and a day and never jump in. And the other person is jumping in every single time, jumping into the void. Not fearing the unknown, embracing the adversity, embracing the craziness of the world all around us without the already solution directly in front of our nose. So if you're standing next to a void and someone is jumping into the void and you never have, that isn't the time to ask the question, hey man, why are you jumping into the void? Because this is the answer you'll get. Because because they're into the void, man, and you're still standing there hanging on, wondering why they're jumping, and you'll never know why until you jump in yourself. Now, to my point, timing is everything. So you don't ask the question while the dude is in midair about to be impacted by gravity straight down the void chute. That's not the time to ask the question. You got to ask the question before they do the leap. Now, how much time do you need to understand what's going on in that moment with that individual who's jumping into the void? How much do you need? A second? Do you need a day? I don't need very long to understand why someone's going into the void. Because, as I stated earlier, between the 1% milk and 2% milk, every decision is important. Every observation is important. The external world around us is a process of understanding all of the variables around us and considering it in the real time to form patterns, to make decisions, to understand what is freaking happening right now. But a lot of people don't think about the right now. They think about their past or they think about the future. They don't process in the real time to understand what that person is all about. And until you start processing the real time, well, you'll miss a lot of the details of life. You'll miss a lot of details about why that guy's in midair about to go into the void. You won't understand why they're doing it. But if you've been a real-time observer of life for a long time, you don't even have to ask the question, why are you jumping into the void? Because you had your answer the moment you saw them take 3 long strides to get up in the air. You already know your answer because you've seen it before. You've thought it before. You've processed it before. You've deeply considered the moment. So you don't have to ask the question. You've already got your answer. But not too many people pay attention to their surroundings. They don't look at the person next to them on the edge of the void and consider them so deeply and so rapidly that they don't have to ask the question. So they don't ask the question of themselves. They don't ask the question of the world around them. They only react when the person is already heading into the void with the, hey, what are you doing? And they're already gone. So, in my opinion, to Noel's point, the void is in front of all of us. You never see the void if you never consider the void. The more you consider the void, the more you see it. The more you look at the person next to you stepping into the void, the better you understand it. All of this is invisible to you if you've never looked at a void and thought, why am I here? And what is this all about? In the real time. Forget about your past, forget about your future. Stand where you're standing and think about what you're thinking in the real time.
This is the hugely important point, I think, in everything we talk about. I mean, we say this all the time. We got the mugs, right? Do your best. But the point is of being in the moment, doing your best in the moment. And Sean, you talked about the ability to know kind of what's going on because you've taken the time to assess it. But what if you haven't had the time to assess it? What if that's the first time you've seen the void? You just all of a sudden like, oh man, you listen to this particular conversation. Somebody's at home. They're like, man, I've never considered the void before. Where do I even begin? There's a whole lot of uncertainty. There's there's information that you just don't have, and it can be really challenging to make any kind of decisions based on that. So I'm wondering how you guys manage when you don't have all the information, when it is really uncertain, but you know a decision needs to be made. Where do you go from there? I'm going to start with Johnny on this one. What do you think?
I'm going to keep this one short and sweet, but I'm extremely curious. So if I'm unsure, I ask as many questions as I possibly can before making that decision. Now, if you're asking, in real time, you have to make it right now. It's a matter of life and death. I think that's a different construct, and it's in day-to-day life is very, very rare. In your worlds, Noel and all of you guys in your operational worlds and your careers, very different. You had to, but in terms of what Sean shared before and Chance you've shared in previous discussions, you guys have so many reps in training and in environments where muscle memory and neurological memory kicks in and you respond and you react. But for me, the short answer is I stay very curious and I want all of the information possible. If it's a new decision or a new challenge, I want to ask as many questions as I can from people that I trust that know more than I do before I make that decision.
Love that. Noel, thoughts on this?
Yeah, so the first thing I want to do was I want to correct what I said. The quote was that I slaughtered was, "He who jumps into the void owes no explanation to those who stand and watch." That's by Jean-Luc Godard, if I pronounced that correctly. But what was just said was great. Like, it's not usually a life and death situation. Luckily not. I had to unlearn a lot of those impulses to act immediately, when it's just about, it's just some vanilla stuff about, whatever in daily life. If I have incomplete information or I'm, managing uncertainty, I almost say that like life is pretty uncertain. We think we know what's going to happen, but there are no guarantees. Like Sean alluded to, all we have is right now. You think I think my mom might live for another 20 years. I certainly hope so. But, there are no guarantees. I might drive away here and not arrive, at home alive. And it's only a 10-minute drive. You don't know. So, but not to get too philosophical or too deep into a tangent, I'd say, finding information and experience, talking to people that have experience on certain things, that might be a great idea. Once again, if it's somebody who knows you and you value, you'll listen to their critique, then you'll also listen to their advice, and not just, listen to somebody or anybody. And then, some decisions this might sound real easy, but some decisions, I just let my wife make some decisions. I'm not going to be, want to be right, or you want peace, or you want to be right. That's all I have to say about that. I love you, honey.
I love that. That's fantastic. Brian, any thoughts on this?
When it comes to critical situations, like the term people will say is like, well, I just reacted on instinct, or but there is a way to actually slow your thought process or your actions through repetition. Hear me out on this. So in the last probably 10 to, 12 years, a lot of larger departments or departments that can afford it have implemented simunitions training and scenario-based training. So I was really fortunate that a couple of my buddies were on a reality-based training on our department. But I realized when we were applying simunitions and fully trained role players, and they were, recording the entire scenario, you go back, you watch it, and they ask you, why did you shoot whatever the person in the blue shirt? Well, they presented themselves as if they had an edged weapon. They came out of their waistband. You start to articulate afterwards, but in the moment, your brain is not articulating necessarily all of that input, and you're getting incomplete input. You don't always get to see the entire weapon. You see a handle of it, or you see someone taking an aggressive posture, and you hear them say, I'm going to kill you, and then they lunge for somebody. And so in those scenarios or those situations, your brain starts to, kind of the way I describe it, is like it begins to move slower, but your actions are smoother, therefore they're quicker. And so the less input you have, obviously, the harder decision is going to be made. But sometimes in a critical situation, you don't have time for that, or you can't go into that state of like paralysis by analysis, where you're sitting there and trying to process every little thing coming in, or you're wanting more information. You don't always get more information. So sometimes it just has to be, what do I have in front of me? And I have to make a decision rapidly, like within half a second. Shoot, no shoot. Or am I going hands-on? Am I going to grab this person that I think has a knife? Well, that's a dumb idea when I've got a weapon or a pistol that I can draw. That's the dire situations. But anything, with the question is a critical situation, that's where my brain goes immediately. And we're in an era right now in America, Canada, and other countries where law enforcement is criticized, and citizens are watching YouTube videos and they're watching body cam videos, and they're sitting back in the comfort of their home, eating potato chips, drinking soft drinks or whatever. And then they're saying, well, I'd never shoot. Why? I can't believe that officer shot that person. And they're being judged out of the context of that critical situation. And the officer only has so much input, but so much time to make a decision, or they're going to be forced to watch another human being get killed in front of them, or they themselves, or watch someone take their own life. And then those are the dire situations. And then from there, it can be applied to other things. I think the idea of less input and more critical the situation is a very, very tough equation. And you do have to be confident in your own actions, and you can actually hone your brain into making better decisions faster by practicing these scenarios and these different situations. And I always had rookies in my car when I was a training officer on patrol, and I would always tell them, keep your brain active. Right now, I'm going to explain to you that, we pull up and a person's got a gun in their waistband, and you see the gun, boom, what's your next action? It may not even be shoot, no shoot. It may be contact. It may call, for check-ins. But what I always wanted the rookies to know is, like, keep your brain active, even when we're not on a call, even when you're not typing and we're sitting in a parking lot trying to catch our breath. I want your brain constantly active like that, so that you start to make decisions better with less input. Or, hey, is this a situation where I can ask more input, which is the verbal side? Hey, why do you have a gun? Dumb question, but I've asked people that before. I don't know. I just gave you a real long answer. Sorry about that.
No, it's all good. It really reminds me of I saw a documentary on special operations at one point in time. They were doing you got the hooded scenarios where you're completely hooded and then just pops off and you have to deal with the scenario in front of you. And sometimes it's engagement, sometimes it's not, whatever, you got to work through it. But that's a great example of what it is you're talking about there, Brian, is the fact that sometimes you just got to be in the moment, but actively in the moment. Otherwise you're on your heels and then you're flat-footed and you don't know where to go from there. Sean, you got any thoughts on any of this?
I do. I got two thoughts. First one is, Inexperience compresses timeline. Experience expands timeline. So looking at a critical situation as the example, and I want to be clear that to maybe establish the definition of critical situation, that could be a 2-second moment that you've got, 2 or 3 seconds. That's all you got. That's the critical situation. Versus, like BC said earlier, maybe it's a 36 to 48 hour detective situation where the burn rate is intense. It's a really critical situation, but it's over a period of time. So the critical situation isn't time locked, it's time flexible. Now that that's established, I'm going back to my initial sentence, which is inexperience compresses timeline, experience expands timeline. So if you're a rookie with BC and you're getting out of the passenger seat, what you're doing is like, oh, do I have my weapon? Do I have my baton? Where's my spray? Oh, is my radio even turned on? That's kind of your thoughts. Whereas BC is getting out of the vehicle and he's like, that's all autonomous. That's all offloaded. That's offloaded through experience. And so as BC gets out of the vehicle, his timeline is expanded. He's got tons of time to play with because he's not thinking about, he's not focused on, he's not working through, are my shoes tied? And so inexperience compresses timeline. And as an inexperienced person, you feel that compression of timeline. It feels like you've got a lot of things to work through. You've got a lot of things to see. There's a lot of noises going on around me. And by the way, does that person have a weapon? This is kind of how it goes with inexperience. But experienced timeline works like this. You get out of the vehicle, everything around you, all sensory input, all of the variability of the real-time complexity is absorbed, processed autonomously, and all you have to consider is the actual importance of the moment, which is gun. And then you don't have to run a whole bunch of fuzzy math if you're super experienced. Your protocols are already in place, and your protocols may not be fixed. They are optional variables that you can choose to go with. If this, then that. And so experience will manage a situation a lot better than inexperience. However, scrap all of that I just said, throw it right out of the window because I said I had 2 points, and here's the second point. If you're really experienced as you're getting out of that car, everything's autonomized, you know how to do the deal, it's going to go bing, bang, boom. And as you are just about to do the most important thing in that process, you have a flashback. Now we're dealing with the hippocampus. And the hippocampus, maybe those memories from way back in the day that you didn't process, are now injecting themselves into the autonomized moment. And that's going to cause you to pause 2, 3, stagger perhaps, maybe make bad decisions based on bad memories, bad logic, bad processing. And so no matter who you are, if you've been in the game a bajillion years, as you get out of that car to deal with the situation, if you haven't dealt with your bajillion years of past, well, maybe you're not going to do it as well as you should have or could have as an experienced individual if you would have just taken the time to sort out some of the stuff in your history. And so it's not as simple as experience will always win the day. An experienced individual who is squared away will always win the day.
I am loving where this is going, and we're going to go around again. Brian, I'm going to come to you on this one, and then we'll go around again. What do you think?
Yeah, that's a good point. Because I had a flashback when you were talking about it. As a patrol sergeant, when I came back to the district that I had been a patrol officer in before, and then I went to a gang unit and drug unit, all this other stuff, homicides detective, and came back as a sergeant. So I had all this experience, but I had been working on different levels with gangs. And so there was a certain day in time, which was August 3rd, the 8th month of the year, third day of the month. And it was this 8 Trey Gangster Crips, day of celebration. And there's probably 60 to 80 guys out in the street, and they're all hanging out and they're all active Crip gang members. I had 2 officers with me, and I had to just, hey, we're going to go in here and explain to them, keep the peace, no gunshots, everybody be cool. I really didn't brief the officers up the way I should have, in the sense of when we get out on foot and we go through the cut, when we come out, there's going to be a large crowd. I didn't really, because I was just kind of used to working that area and doing those things. And I knew in my head, a lot of the gang members, I knew how to be able to talk to them. But when we popped out of the cut, everybody's yelling F12 and, they're cussing and screaming and yelling. Anyway, I throw up a few hand signs, kind of break the ice, joking and laughing. And I kind of nerded up, push my glasses up, whatever. And then we talk, and I just lay it out like, hey, this is what's going to happen. We're going to walk on foot around the area. Just kind of be aware that we're here. No gunshots, shut it down around 11 o'clock. And we should be good to go. We'll keep any of your enemies or anybody like that from coming into the area and causing problems. Then we walk off, and then an officer, really squared away officer, but he's like, hey, Sarge, I was getting ready to call the blue wave, because he heard everybody screaming and yelling at first, and he thought that it was just going to be a melee, like they were just going to attack us. I didn't brief them as much when I should have, like, hey, this is a decision I've already made, and this is the way I'm going to handle it. We're going to talk our way in and out of here. And we're also going to explain to them our actions when they know we're in the area, So it's one of those things that my brain's just taking it all in. That's why I could kind of throw some hand signs and laugh and joke when guys are actually screaming and yelling about wanting to kill us. But I knew how to kind of diffuse that because of the experience. And kind of like you said, the more experience you have, the more of a timeline. In my brain, everything's kind of moving in slow motion. But probably for this officer, it was like rapid input, like, whoa, we're completely outnumbered. Everybody's screaming and yelling. Sarge is over here speaking in sign language with these Crip gang members. But it was one of those things that, just like you said, the more experience you have, the better your timeline is, and the more, I guess, the smoother your actions can be, and probably with the more confident outcome. Like, I kind of went into that situation knowing it's not going to go sideways. I don't know. That part's kind of hard to explain, but I would also say, if you're in a leadership position, try to do your best to brief anyone with you on your actions and what you expect the outcome to be. I had time on my side, and I should have explained it instead of just kind of taking them right into the fray the way I did.
Yeah, I think a lot of us sometimes forget that decisions we make internally aren't expressed externally.
Right.
We're just kind of like, oh yeah, this is good. Totally fine.
And others may receive some action for that or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. Johnny, you got thoughts on this one?
Yeah, a couple from Sean and from Brian, what he was talking about before with rookie officers. He really spoke about really the essence of mental performance in terms of getting the reps. Before I touch on that, though, I want to go back to something that Sean was speaking on, and I love how he framed, inexperience compresses time, experience can extend time, and I think what Brian, we all would probably agree on the other side of that coin, because we all on the collective, we like pushing back and saying, let's look at it from a different way. Experience can also create complacency. Probably not in Brian's case. Extremely decorated career. You can tell very professional, but I guarantee you he worked with lots of dudes that have been on the job for decades, and experience can create complacency as well. And so it really brings me back to, we've all said this in different ways, but we get better at what we practice. What we have to get away from, I think, is this idea that practice makes perfect. That's garbage. Practice makes permanent. So we've got to practice correctly, with intention, with deliberation. And that's really where Sean took me when he was talking about, seeing this scenario so many times, or having a moment of a flashback, or something else pops off at the same time you're dealing with a situation that is extremely acute and very dangerous. How do you manage both situations? You can't always get that practice, even for veteran operators, veteran police officers, veteran mental performance coaches who's worked in the suicide prevention space for 25 years and you think you've seen it all until you haven't, until you've seen something new, right? So I think practice makes permanent. And then the other thing that I love that Brian was doing with his rookies, I've talked to so many operators. I've been very fortunate to talk with and work with a lot of professional athletes. And I try to draw similarities from those groups because I believe they're synonymous in so many ways. They're best in the world at what they do, whether a warfighter or an NFL football player. You're the best in the world at what you do. And so I asked them from a mental performance perspective, what works for them. And Brian, the example he gave about having conversations with his rookie officers while they're in the car and walking through scenarios, it's what we call mental imagery. We can do that in our own lives all the time so that we can expedite decision making. To Sean's point, even without the real experience, we can get that through mental imagery. Now, we'll never be able to replicate like the actual scenario, but the more reps we get in a rookie walking through that with a senior leader who cares about his safety and welfare, who wants to do the job well, man, the more we can chop it up when we're in the cruiser, the better that young man or woman is going to be prepared when they get dispatched to a call that is their first. And so a couple gems, I think, from each of you guys, really the importance of proper practice, and then how do we expedite decision-making in acute situations. Mental imagery is a great way to do it. Walking through those scenarios with someone who's lived them many, many times can be really helpful. So great stuff, guys. Love this stuff. And some really good examples from both of you. So I hope people are, I know I'm writing a ton of stuff down. I hope others are as well.
I have so many timestamps. I don't know what I'm going to do for clips here. I basically wrote like first question and beyond for like, I don't, this is awesome. Noel, you got any thoughts on this?
First thought that came to mind was a quote, good decisions come from experience. Experience comes from making bad decisions. But the mental imagery, that was also really good. Obviously, for this is my own experience. First time I had to treat somebody as a medic, I was like, oh shit! It was a ricochet that a fellow Marine got in his upper leg, and it was only it splintered, so it was lying only tiny, but it was still bleeding. And I'm like, oh ish, this is happening, and I gotta be on top of my shit. Oh, so I tried to not say the word, and then I said the word still, whatever. I had to cut that out. Sorry, folks. And but you're like super nervous and everything. And then like the more reps I got, treating some serious injuries, eventually like a priority 1 casualty on deployment, it was still very intense. But you already, like Sean said, radio switched on. I know how the layout of my medic bag, I know what everybody else is probably going to be doing while I'm doing this. Still, you had to be switched on, but by exposing yourself multiple times to certain situations, either simulated or real life, that will definitely fill up that backpack with experience. So you hopefully will not F up, because, for instance, what my train of thought always was like with casualties or with people, you don't want to mess up. There is only a few ways it can go well and end well, but there are many, many, many ways that it will end badly. Especially, you need as a medic. This is how I thought of it. You have to be switched on somebody's worst day. So this person right in front of you is not, seriously injured, might lose their life. You need to be switched on. So you need to take it seriously. The decisions, your protocols, your gear, everything needs to be like, you better, you can't have an off day on somebody's worst day. And that's all I really wanted to add. The mental imagery really helps. I use that with my clients as well. It's almost like preparing for the worst, or I guess not per se the worst, but different flavors of bad. And you work through that, and you expose yourself or others, if you want to help them, in a positive way. You help them either through a training scenario or with simunition, or role play. I guess finding something that you think you need or you think somebody else needs, you help them get more experience, so you then hopefully can set them loose and go like, all right, you're good enough. Now you got to figure it out yourself.
Yeah, this is a great point. I know Sean's said this many times over the last almost 400 episodes of the collective, is the fact that the really good operators don't care about what they did right. They care about what they did wrong so that they can fix it for the next time, and just continually engaging that cycle. And you brought up a memory of mine, was the fact that when I was in Afghanistan for 5 months of the 8 that I was there, I was on QRF. So I was constantly just like, go. And the first couple, it was really nerve-wracking. Oh my God, do I have my stuff? And I got to make sure my my metal detector and all my explosives, and you're checking everything. But by the time, 3-4 months into it, I didn't have to check anything. All my stuff was loaded. All my stuff was geared right. And when the time to go was go time, it wasn't a sprint to the lab. We walked with purpose, right? You're okay, off we go. And then off you move on to the mission from there. But and to your point, Noel, it's similar for an engineer as it is for a medic, is that you got to be on when everybody else might not be, or they have other tasks, right? So you have to be so focused on your task when everybody else is on their task. And it's a really interesting mindset to go back into, to try and sort through all of the mess of memories that's back there. Sean, you got any thoughts on any of this?
I do. So something that I think is really important, BC said it, and I'll try not to expand on it too much, but I do have to make a pretty significant point here. So when BC was getting out of the vehicle out of the vehicle, I'm assuming you drove to the gang party, but when you were coming through the cut and you've got the other officers with you, I don't know what you said to them leading up to that moment, how you briefed them or didn't brief them. It doesn't matter at this point. Your story is a great example of many different ways we could take this conversation. But if I'm in that situation, here's what I want to happen. Whether it's 2 people or 12 people with me is unimportant. How skilled they are or not is unimportant to me. What I want to happen in that moment is for them to synchronize with me. Now, I want to be able to look at them and say, follow my lead, sync up. And if they can sync up with me, we're going to be okay. And so we need to move as an organism, not as a disparate body of a bunch of people bumbling into each other. What we need is an appropriate group presence for that moment. And if someone is screwing that up, if someone isn't syncing up, if someone isn't in synchronicity with me as the experienced leader in that moment, they don't even have to say anything. They only have to look the wrong way. And now we've got trouble. And so it's about reading the moment and doing it right, of course. But before that reading the moment, it's about reading the team that I'm on, the team that is with me. Them and me working together in a synchronous organization, synchronous organism, synchronous moment. So that's difficult as a rookie or as a noob. When you step out of that vehicle and you're following BC through the cut, you've got bigger problems than how's BC walking? How's BC feeling? What's the vibe he's giving off right now? How do I be him in this moment? You're just trying to figure out if you've even got your radio on you right now. And so rather than focusing on techniques and skills and where your pistol is, all of those things are important. But those decisions were made before you got out of the car. As you're getting out of the car, you've only got one job, and that's to sync up with the moment. And if you get out of the car, you're 100 meters away from the car and you realize you left your pistol in the car, but you're through the cut and you're facing the gang, you can't freaking panic. You can't look the wrong way. You can't look down at your pistol and go, "Oh, hey, Brian, I forgot my pistol in the ... Now you're screwed. Not only have you screwed yourself, but you've screwed Brian. Because the message that you're giving out is not the message that Brian wants to have given out in that moment. You need, as a group, to display authority, strength, cohesiveness, discipline, focus, doing it right in the frickin' moment. And by walking up on the moment with your shoelaces untied, your hat on sideways, and your wallet just fell out of your pocket 10 meters ago, you're a gong show. You're a gypsy caravan. That's the image you're giving off, and that's where the trouble begins, because you are not synchronized up with the group. And so that's not on Brian, by the way. If he didn't give that briefing as he got out of that car, sync up, troops. If he didn't say that, that's not on Brian. That's on the group. That's on you, because that's the only job you've got in that moment, is to synchronize up with the moment. No matter how little skill you've got or all the skill in the world, you've got one job, and that is synchronize to the now. And I don't think enough people do that very well.
I don't think enough people do that at all, let alone well. I think that's part of the issue. And we're talking about reflection and being able to look back on stuff and say, oh, well, I did it this way. Perhaps now I should do it this way, or, utilizing experience and so on and so forth. But how do we, when you're reflecting on those decisions, when you're reflecting on what has happened in the past, how do you guys evaluate whether or not those choices were correct or accurate or not correct? Or how do you engage whether or not you made the right choice in the moment? Noel, I'm going to start with you. What do you think?
Well, I don't think the reason that you keep doing certain things is, we've always done it this way. I don't think that's a great argument for, repeating certain behavior. I think self-reflection is very important. I try to do that every day. And, so far, since I've been doing it, I've, yet to find a day where I was like, oh, I did everything great today. Pretty critical, very, be tolerant with others and strict with yourself. Is something I like to use a lot, at least for myself. And my point where I'd say, I did well or I did not do so well, even if it ended in a positive way, I'll still be like, how could I improve this? Or perhaps using some, if we're talking about people, not a process per se, I would say, using empathy is a great idea. I'm sorry, I forgot who said it. It might be Johnny, but I'm not sure. There are different people and everybody comes from a different side or views view things in a certain way. So you might consider it a success while somebody else might be like, no, this is, this totally blows. I'm not happy with this at all. So I think that's important, at least to me. I think it can always get better, 1% better every day, every moment, do your best every day. I think that's a great way of, at least viewing it. Just because it ended positively doesn't mean it couldn't get better.
Yeah, I'm tracking on that one for sure. Johnny, thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think, I love that you use the term reflection. That's the essence of learning, right? We don't learn from experience. We learn from reflecting on experience. Otherwise, none of us would ever make the same mistake twice. And I'm pretty sure we all have. So I do multiple of the same every day. And it's because I'm not taking the time to reflect. In terms of evaluating, really goes back to how you started the conversation for me a couple hours ago. I can't believe how fast this conversation has gone by. I love it. But for me, man, when I evaluate my day, and I write every morning. I start my day very, very specific way, and I revisit it at night. For me, it's have these decisions, the most critical decisions I've made during the day, have they aligned with my values? Am I making this decision in alignment with what I say matters most? Because if I say that my values are family, selfless service, financial freedom, growth, am I trying to touch those every day? Am I making decisions that are aligned with those values? And when I assess in the evening or at the end of a week and I say, okay, how did I touch the value of family today? When I had an opportunity to spend 45 minutes with my daughter and I had nothing else to do, did I say yes and get in the car and go? Or did I say no and pretend I had something else to do for work? Right. So for me, it's really, really boils down to, are the decisions that I'm making aligned with who I say I am trying to be? Hard stop.
I love it. I love it. Brian, thoughts on this?
Yeah, it kind of comes full circle, and I don't know, kind of like we've put everything in motion now and talked about being in the moment, making decisions, based on the limited input you get, keeping others informed of the decisions you're making. Just I think that, and I can't speak as eloquent as Sean can. He starts breaking down the hippocampus and the thalamus and I don't know. He may have even said pituitary. I don't know, but the brain is a magnificent thing. I do think that we're in an era of decision making where people are trying to understand it at every stop, as opposed to probably even 20 years ago, 30 years ago, where people were just like, that person's got good instincts, we'll follow them. We're trying to understand it a lot more and break it down, even to the minutia. But either way, man, I enjoy whenever you start talking about the brain box that way.
He has a certain way of speaking, doesn't he? It's pretty awesome.
Yes.
Sean, you got any thoughts on this?
And dude, I've called it the brain box, the brain bucket. I've called it all kinds of things because that's right where my head is at, no pun intended as well. And so I do want to take the sentence and just tear it up just a little bit, because I don't want everyone out there to assume that everyone 100% always reflects on past decisions, because that is not true. Actually, not enough people reflect on their past decisions. And so how do you evaluate whether you made the right choice if you're actually not reflecting on your past decisions? I'll tell you how. Frickin' life will let you know. It'll either let you know by the end of the day, or it'll let you know by the end of your life. You'll figure it out because life will let you know. It'll either slap you upside the head, or it'll push you into the void, or whatever. Life will let you know if you're making the right decisions or not. Now, here's the important distinction. Where does self-reflection come in? Well, that's called the efficient and effective method of getting further ahead in life. If you aren't using reflection, life will teach you the lesson, but it might be frickin' 15 years from now. I've got all kinds of regrets, for sure, from my past. Because back in the day when I was a young buck, I didn't think things through too well. I was a bit fast to act, a man of action, I suppose, but I didn't have it under control. I didn't have my sliders understood. And so, Noel, to your point early near the start of the podcast, what I have said recently in the podcast is this: we've got 3 sliders. Think of it as a soundboard, or from a sound engineering mixing station perspective. You've got your physiological, you've got your psychological, and you've got your emotional. And those 3 sliders can't all go to 100%. You can use 100% for the 3. So that might have your physiological at 70%, and then 10% for the other one, and 5% for the other one, or whatever, whatever your balance is. So you get to move your sliders all day long. If you go all 100% on the physiological aspect of I'm going to kick ass, Well, that's the other two that aren't being looked after. So when you're reflecting on how you're doing your day, that's where you get to understand right choices. If you don't self reflect, you'll eventually understand that you made poor choices 15 years from now.
Absolutely. This is I'm I have like another dozen questions, so we could probably spend the rest of the day talking about this, but I don't want to spend too much time, too much of your guys' time. And I know, Noel, you probably need to go to bed at some point tonight, so that might be good. But I do have a couple of questions that came in online that I wanted to touch on before we shut her down for the afternoon. Brian's having some internet issues, so he'll be in and out for the next little bit, but we'll keep him updated as things go on. So I'm going to put up this first question. And then I got another one here as well with some comments that I want to hit before we shut her down. So here's this right off the bat. Real Keith, this came from the Instagram feed, so I had to switch it over while we were chatting. He says, I don't know how to phrase this question. I have a cognitive processing disorder and often make knee-jerk reactions or completely shut down when I become overloaded. Any comments or ideas? So let's get some thoughts on that. Johnny, how do you think?
Yeah, I don't want to armchair quarterback a question like this. When I read CPD or cognitive processing disorder, I would want more context. What I'm reading in here is really around impulsivity or removal and isolation. And where my curious questions would go, on that continuum, I'd want to know from real Keith W. where he tends to head more, right? If it's more the knee-jerk emotional reactions, or is it complete removal and isolation? I would also be really curious, Keith, what, if anything, are you doing or have you done, brother, around drill work and resources to step into the anxiety from a different perspective rather than I feel completely overwhelmed. The walls are caving in. There's so much going on. How do I take really small pieces of what is overwhelming me without painting the entire picture as I'm completely overwhelmed? I like to work with people on taking just one thing that is within their control right now and try to get a win in that area. When we look at how much is overwhelming us, it becomes just that. We don't know what to tackle first. So when we can look at a challenge or a struggle and we're feeling overwhelmed, what is one piece of that I can tackle right now? Not wait, not put it off, not add another drop of fuel to an already burning anxious fire, but what is just one thing I can do right now so that I can shift the momentum a little bit and feel like I am now in control of this anxiety or these emotions. I'm making it the most beautiful person in the room and I'm asking them to dance rather than the walls are closing in, right? And our mindset, our approach to that situation can really help us navigate it. A lot of times what I see people do is they just try to navigate it way too quickly and they just hit the wall and it only adds to their frustration. And maybe if you're listening to this, that resonates with you. But I would say take one piece of that situation, just one. What can I control right now? And how can I get a win to shift the momentum?
I love that. That's fantastic. Noel, you got any thoughts on this question?
Well, yes, but definitely not as eloquent as was just stated by Johnny. I read a book recently. I'm not sure which one, but I wrote down the 4 P's. Now, obviously, I'm not a mental health professional. I have no experience with cognitive processing disorder. I just know that what helped me when I felt overwhelmed or overloaded or made knee-jerk reactions, I guess, who hasn't? What I wrote down, I have it here on a cue card in my office, is pause, take 2 breaths, process, label your emotions, plan, think, and then proceed, do. That was just something that kind of worked for me. Definitely not to the level of what real Keith W is mentioning. And next to that, is a cue card that says my response is my responsibility. But that's more further down the line, I guess, where you're not trying to react in an impulsive or emotional way. But that's what I'm saying right now is perhaps more useful to people that don't have a cognitive processing disorder. So I'm not trying to sit in the chair or give advice of somebody who is an expert in this field. I'm just trying to share some thoughts that have been on my mind and that I've been working on. I do hope that the person who asked this question hopefully finds something that works for them.
Yeah, the reason I wanted to bring it up especially too is because the fact that we may not all have experience with it, but I'm sure we've all made many knee-jerk reactions and have felt overwhelmed on many occasions. Sean, you got thoughts on this at all?
I do. And so as Noel said, and this is self-explanatory. I don't think anyone on here is such a mental health professional that we have all these things figured out. But my opinion is as such that, the knee-jerk reactions or complete shutdown, let me deal with knee-jerk reactions first, may be a result of misappropriated reward systems. And so by that, I mean, like if you do knee-jerk reactions constantly, well, perhaps that's a dopamine issue. And so you love the feeling of dopamine. Your knee-jerk reaction creates dopamine, more dopamine, 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 dopamine. And eventually, the desire for dopamine and all of those knee-jerk reactions leads to a bit of a shutdown. And so if you start your day by making a ton of knee-jerk reactions, and this is not directed at real Keith W., this could be directed at anyone who wakes up first thing in the morning, jumps onto Call of Duty, frazzles out all of their dopamine based on knee-jerk reactions within a computer simulation. And then they start crashing and shutting down the moment that they step into the actual world and they're trying to make decisions within a family or trying to make decisions in a car or trying to make decisions at work. These overloaded moments could simply be a result of burned out neurotransmitters, whether that be dopamine, serotonin, or norepinephrine, or a number of neurotransmitters that work within our biological mechanisms to help us make decisions or make us incapable of making decisions. So the reward system might be something to consider. And the second thing that I'd like to say is I use it myself. I taught it to a dude in our little hobbit town here just a few days ago. It's called the psychological sigh. And it's from Andrew Huberman, is where I picked it up a while ago. And so that's simply a case of, maybe I'll just do it right now. I'll explain it and then do it so that maybe real Keith W. or whoever's listening can get some instant reset, instant relaxation, instant feeling of calm, which will then help create a baseline of your neurotransmitters and all that good stuff and see what comes of that. So the psychological sigh is this. You take a big, deep breath in through your nose. And then once you've got a full breath, then you actually top it up just a little bit more. And then you let it out through your mouth slowly. So it's like this. And you can see how my shoulders were sinking as I let that big, long sigh out. You can do 2, 3, 4 in a row. Big, deep breath in, top it up, let it out nice and slow. Feel your shoulders relax and see how calm you get. It is a reset of your sympathetic system, and it's really helpful to just be in the now and feel how you're supposed to feel at a baseline level of not freaking out, not bummed out, but just being coolio in the moment. That's where you need to be. And a psychological sigh, 2, 3, 4 in a row right now, bam, you can get back to your baseline. And then look at the world around you and see how much you have to interact with it or how much you can just chillax in it.
That is a fantastic tool. the psychological sigh. I've used it a number of times. I actually taught it to my jujitsu class at one point when after a number of hard rolling moments and everyone was still really tense. And I was like, okay, everybody, let's bring it down. That is a fantastic tool for those. Now, we are a little bit over 2 hours now, and I can't thank you guys enough. This has been a fantastic conversation. I'm going to hit a couple of these comments, and then we're going to jump into some final thoughts here. I got a comment here from Sven. Says, tell Noel his most handsome trainee is Sven. There you go. He's with you here.
So Sven is one of my clients. I helped him. His hard work and my coaching, that's usually what I say. He earned his Maroon Beret. He is an officer at the Air Mobile Brigade. I shared that I was going to be on, and I knew there's going to be some trash talking or some sly comments. But hoi Sven, Bonnekoek. Just called him a pancake in Dutch. But he's a good dude. He's a good dude.
Awesome. And then Mike Wilford jumped on here. He said, this was very early on. He said, question I asked myself before making a decision is why now? What's changed? And I want to get your guys' just quick thoughts on that. Anything on, does that spark anything? Johnny, I'm going to start with you. What do you think?
The only thing it sparks for me, probably because it's so fresh, is sort of what my brother Sean made me think of a few minutes ago when he said, you will either choose or life will choose for you. I think there's so much fluidity in the journey that I don't know. For Mike, maybe it's just how we're traveling through this journey of life, and rather than looking for specifically what's changed, I think what's maybe even as powerful to ask in that situation is, what do I stand to gain from making this decision now? How do I stand to grow from making this decision now? How might this decision align with that which matters most to me? But I personally, just Johnny's opinion, I'd be less concerned in the moment about what has changed, and because accepting life for what it is and that it is fluid and ever changing, I'd be more curious about how this decision that I'm deciding to is going to move the needle in my life. That's where my head goes first, brother.
I like it. Noel, you got any thoughts on this?
Yeah. While Sean was mentioning it, a thought came to mind. Remind of a quote is the universe will repeat itself until the lesson is learned. So perhaps something has changed, but you can't put your finger on it. But perhaps you're trying to do your meditation or you're doing your daily journaling, and you're like, there's a notion or a feeling where you're like, perhaps I should handle this differently, and perhaps that has changed. Perhaps under the radar.
That is a great point. Sean, any thoughts on this?
Mike coming in with the solid. Here's something that runs through my mind. What's changed? Well, everything. It's called entropy. It's existing constantly within our universe. Entropy. All around us right now as we die. So that's what's changing. What else is changing? Well, our perspective of the world. And so let's keep it super simple. If you're in a moment where you're thinking, why now? What has changed? Congratulations. That's the best spot to be, because that why now then automatically flows into, well, why not now? Why now? Why not now? And I think that's the yin and yang of life. If and Mike has been a guest on the show before, so I know this is not a puzzling question to him. I do appreciate the softball lob that he's given us, though. If you're not thinking why now, and also why not now, then you're missing half of the equation. If all you ever think is why not now, but you miss the why now, you're not deeply thinking. You're half thinking. So the question in my mind is why now / why not now? That is the full determination of the real-time moment. And what's changed? Well, everything. Right now, it's changing as we speak in real time. life is constantly changing. And so how much change do you want to observe in your life? Well, how deep do you want to look at your life? If you want to be unaware of what's going on the daily, not much is changing, but everything is changing. And so how aware of change are you or not will directly impact the answer or the outcome of that initial question, which is why now / why not now?
When you started talking about entropy, it brought up the quote in my mind. The fact it's a Heraclitus quote: "No man ever steps in the same river twice, for it is not the same river, and he is not the same man." And I think that's it's a great little addition to that. Now, that's all the questions and comments I have. Let's get some final thoughts. Anything still burning in the back of your brain, or anything else that you want to get across on decision making, or anything else we've talked about today? Noel, any thoughts?
Yeah, what was just the final thoughts are like, in life change is constant. I think that, and what you mentioned of Heraclitus, I like that a lot too. Of Stoic philosophy or philosophy in general, it's all about how you navigate the constant change. Nothing stays the same. Some people might say, life repeats itself, or the universe repeats itself, or whatever. But we are constantly changing, and it's basically how you roll with those punches that determines how well you go through life. I think the metaphor that's used, that is a dog is being pulled by your cart, and either the dog can resist the change, and try to stop it, or dig its heels into the dirt or the sand, but the cart's still going that way. Or you could be led by the cart, and that the metaphor is obviously that fate is the cart, and you let it lead you in a certain way. I guess that's something I wanted to finish with.
An interesting point on that one for sure. Johnny, any final thoughts?
Not specific to decision making, but just very similar to how I feel every time I get to share time and space with you guys. Extremely grateful, um, really fulfilled professionally on a Friday afternoon to be able to chop it up on this concept with just some good men. And so I guess my thoughts right now are dominated by my feelings, which are of gratitude to meet some new friends, and to also be able to connect chance with you and Sean again. So I just appreciate it, and I hope it was of some value to the folks that listened. I know I always enter an environment a bit selfishly as well, because it's a great opportunity to learn from others that I respect, and some new folks that I now respect as well. So I appreciate you guys. Just very grateful going into the weekend. Thank you.
Oh, it is our pleasure hanging out here. It truly is. I've said this many times. I learn so much from the collective. I get to sit down and talk with so many amazing people. I love it every time we get to come on here. Sean, any final thoughts?
I do. And I've never thought this before. This is a completely novel thing that I'm going to throw out there. It's not like a big deal, but in my head, it's a big deal. And so, Chance, you talked about a man stepping into a river, and that step into that river the second time, he's not the same man. It's not the same river, of course, because water keeps flowing, and therefore it's not the same water. And so here's what I just thought when I heard you say that. And again, just I don't know why my brain works this way, but if I'm the man and I'm stepping into the river is life. The river of life keeps flowing. The river of life all around us. Johnny, Noel, Chance, myself, we're all in the river of life. The moment that I step into that river, I've created an impact in the river. As I step out of it, that's now downstream. Whether I had a pair of dirty hiking boots as I stepped into that river, well, now the soil off my hiking boots is downstream, impacting someone else who's downstream, who's about to step into that river. And depending what I bring into that river, whether it's a bunch of silt or whether I leave no mark in the river, that has ripple on effect downstream. So this isn't just a single journey of a man stepping into a river for the second time. The second time is me leaving the mark that hopefully is a better mark on the river of life than the first time that I stepped in it. So we're not just walking through water, we're walking through life. And every step that we take has downstream ripple effect. So that's kind of where I'd like to leave things for me.
I really like that. It reminded me of, and a little story before I shut her down here, but when a while ago they reintroduced wolves into Yellowstone, I think, into that park again, and it changed the way the river flowed by the fact that the wolves then predated upon the elk, and the elk started using different trails than they used to have, which eroded the river in certain areas, which allowed the river to change course overall. And so a decision made by somebody to say, hey, maybe we should bring wolves back, change the course, the flow of a river that then affects everybody downstream. And so really the only thought I have is, in terms of decision making, is, are you going to pee in the river for everybody else downstream? Or are you going to try to clean up what's in front of you to make sure that it's cleaner for those downstream? So little thought to end the show on. And I can't thank you guys enough. I'm talking to Brian here. His internet just kind of crashed. So unfortunately he won't be able to jump in and give his final thoughts. But I want to thank you guys again, Johnny, Noel, Sean, and Brian. This is a fantastic conversation. Can't thank you enough. So as we all continue to learn, build, and grow, we'll see y'all next week.
Thank you guys so much.